What is up, you guys? So I am sick today, so you're gonna have to deal with my sexy sick voice, so I hope you don't mind. But what we're gonna be working on today is boost tuning the Subaru finally. I've just been super busy lately, and life has not lined up in a way that I could get these tuning videos knocked out, so I'm finally getting around to it. Hopefully it goes smooth from here. So car's on ethanol right now. We're going to be tuning the boost pressure to 25 psi is my goal. The turbo is definitely capable of 25 psi. It's definitely capable of more, but for ethanol, 25 psi is what I'm comfortable running on this engine. So let's get into the tuning. So first off, we're going to get the base tune set up. So we're gonna lower the Wastegate Duty Cycle down to 0. We're gonna remove some timing just for safety. And then the first pull that we're gonna do, we're going to do on no wastegate and just see what the turbo makes without any assistance from the computer. That way we can design our target boost table with our 25 psi target in mind. And then once we have that designed, we can add in some Wastegate Duty Cycle, monitor the Wastegate Duty Cycle, and monitor the turbo dynamics, and use those two values to decide how much more Wastegate Duty Cycle to add in to reach our targets. Hopefully this goes good. This is my first time doing this in depth of boost tuning, so it's going to be a learning experience for both of us, but I think it'll work out good. So first thing we got to do is our initial run. So let me get the logger set up and I'll show you what parameters we're going to be logging. We're just going to go from the top down on this list and figure out what we want to log. We're definitely going to want to log boost error. Our wideband O2 sensor is important. Engine speed is also always important. I'm gonna log fuel pressure just because. So like a lot of these manifold relative pressures, they only go up to a certain level, but one of them doesn't have like a limit. It'll just go as high as it needs to. I think it's this one, manifold relative pressure. Yeah, because it says no limit at the end there. So that's the one we're gonna log. Our mass airflow sensor voltage. So we're gonna want to log primary wastegate duty cycle, target boost. I'm gonna do the 4-byte version. So we need to do turbo dynamics integral, turbo dynamics proportional. And the only thing we're missing is engine load, which I must have skipped over. Let's do final fueling base as well. Engine load. Yeah, so that looks all good to me. So I had a mishap in the filming of this boost tuning video. So a lot of the screen recording didn't actually get recorded. So I'm having to go back and look at the videos that I filmed and basically e-tune based off of the tunes that I have so that I can explain to you guys what you need to do. So if there's any discrepancies, that's probably why. I should be able to look at the data logs and come to the same conclusions that I did previously. So that's why you'll see me at home in some clips and then me out on the testing grounds for other clips. So before we do the base run, I'm going to put a base tune on it first just to make things safe for the tuning process. So since we're going to be adding more boost pressure than we've had before, one thing we're going to want to do is remove the timing. And then if we're making any changes to the target boost table, we want to make sure we start with a 0 wastegate duty cycle. If you look at ECU flash here, you'll see I closed all the tables except the ones that we need. So starting at the top here, target boost, we don't need to touch these yet, but this is just what the target boost was set up as for running 20 psi on 91 octane. So we'll mess with those later, but for the base tune, these are fine for now. Boost limit, you're going to want to set this like a little higher than whatever your target is. These are for different atmospheric pressure levels, and then these are the PSI absolute. So if you take 40.68 and you subtract 14.7 from that, it should give you like 28 PSI or something. So this is actually 26 PSI. So my target's 25 PSI, boost cut set to 26 PSI. You could honestly do it a little higher. But all these values, if you subtract the value on the left from the value on the right, you should get the same number through this whole column here. So set that up how you want it to. 1 to 2 psi higher than your target is usually a good call. So for our base tune, we're going to want to set all three of these tables. So we have max wastegate duty cycle, And then we have the 2 initial Wastegate Duty Cycles. You're going to want to set all of those to 0, which you can see I already did here. And that's going to let us see what the turbo does on its own without any help from the boost controller. And it's also going to ensure that we're not going to overboost the car. And then the final thing we're going to want to change for the base tune is the base timing table. And how I like to do this, I like to just keep it really simple, but I'll select from 1.5 grams per revolution all the way to 3.5 grams per revolution. This is like your high load ranges where you're going to be wide open throttle. So I'll select those. I'll come to edit and I'll click add to data and I'll do -4. So I'm just going to pull 4 degrees of timing across the whole table. And that just drops this shelf a bit and gives us a little bit of a safety zone, because if we leave the timing where it's at and we add 5 more PSI of boost, we can induce some knocking. Even though we're on ethanol, it's still best just to pull some timing out for now, and then we'll add it back in later once the boost tuning is done. So that's all for the base tunes. So let's do the base run and see what this turbo can do all by itself. One thing that makes this tuning process a whole lot easier is this Easy Flash test connector button that I designed. This plugs right into the factory green test connector buttons. So when you need to reflash your ECU, all you have to do is press a button. Simple as that. No more fumbling around the wires trying to plug the connectors in with one hand or tearing out the wires on accident when you're unplugging them. If you are enjoying these videos and want to help to support the channel, you can pick up an Easy Flash test connector button or any of the other products I make over at swspeedco.com. All right, back to the tuning. So let's take a look at our data log. So this is going to allow us to see the boost curve, and we can kind of shape our target boost map according to this curve, because this in general will be the shape that the turbo will make even when we raise the boost pressure up higher. So we're going to use this as our base to design our target boost curve. So if we go to ECU Flash, we have a target boost A and a target boost B table. We're just going to make these identical, so we can really only modify one and then we'll just copy it over to the other one. But the first thing I'm going to look for is where we hit peak boost and what is the peak boost. So our target boost is in white and our actual boost is in red. Let's see, our max boost is 19.3 psi. So where do we hit that? So we hit max at 5,300 RPMs essentially. But you can see by the shape of the curve that I would say right here is where we can potentially hit peak boost, because this is like where it's kind of starting to plateau, but it's like steep, starting to plateau. So that's at like 3,800 RPMs, and it gets really flat around 4,000, and it still climbs and then flattens out all the way to red line. And then you can see here on this bottom graph, 0 Wastegate Duty Cycle. So based on this graph, I think it's very doable to hit our 25 PSI target at 4,000 RPMs. That's what I'm going to design into the map first. Before we change any values in here, I want to rescale the RPM on this side here, because you can see we have like 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, and then it's like 5,600, 5,200, 4,800. These areas right here, we should already be at our boost target, and then we're just maintaining that. So we shouldn't have to fluctuate the Wastegate Duty Cycle very much in those zones. So we don't need as much resolution. But for the spool up range, as we saw in the map, around 4,000 is where we're going to hit peak boost. So our spool up range is from like 3,000 RPMs to 4,000 RPMs. So we want to have more resolution right there, because that's where we're going to be shaping the curve, and that's where we're going to be able to tune precisely to keep from overboosting. I'm going to build in a little bit more resolution in those zones, and that's kind of how the factory system works, because the factory turbo, the spool up range is like 3,000 to 3,500. So you could see 2,400, 2,800, 3,600. There's a lot more resolution here than after 4,000. It's less resolution. But let's rescale this, and I'm going to do this in a very easy way. So we're just going to click 5,600, click equal. We'll set this to 5,000 RPMs. And then this one, we will make 4,500 RPMs. This one can be 4,000 RPMs. And then this one, I'll do 3,650. And then we'll set this one to 3,300. And then this 2,800 will turn into 3,000. And this turbo is not gonna do anything below 3,000 RPMs. So the resolution down here doesn't really matter, but we'll leave those where they're at. So this, I think, is a good rescaling. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it onto the other table. Now that we have that done, it's rescaled. We're gonna do the same thing to our wastegate tables. We're gonna open up our initial A and B and our max wastegate duty cycle tables. And you can see we have the same scaling values here. So this one we're going to change to 5,000. This one we're going to change to 4,500. That one is fine at 4,000. 3,600, 3,200. And then I'm just going to make this match. So this one's already really close, but I'll just make it 3,650 just to keep things consistent. Control copy, Control V, and Control V. Now that we have all these tables rescaled, we can start adjusting the values in them. So I'm going to start right here at 4,000 RPMs in the wide open throttle area. And I'm going to set this to 25 PSI. And then we're going to want to hold that the rest of the way. So I'm going to set all these values to 25 as well. Now before this, we're going to have to decide what values are realistic. So the value we have here is 3,650. So I'm going to go back to our data log. We're going to find 3,650 and we are at 12 PSI with no help from the boost system. I think setting this to 20 is a good starting place. And then our next one is 3,300. So same thing, let's go back to here. We'll look for 3,300. So we're around at 3,300. We're at 5 PSI. So the turbo's not doing much right here. And this is kind of a crucial area where it's like, yes, we want it to be realistic, but we also want it to be kind of a little higher. Because if we have it set to 5 PSI, the wastegate duty cycle is not going to be maxing out. And that's not going to get it to spool up quick enough. So we kind of want it to be a positive turbodynamics number in our spool up zone to help get it to spool up quicker. This one we did 20. This one I'm going to do 15 just to give it a decent, step drop. I think anything below that, we just got to make it look smooth. So we're going to have boost error, but we can just make this equal to 10. And then so we'll set that equal to 10, and then I'm just going to interpolate this vertically. So we have 8, 9, 10, 15, 19, 25. So that's our wide open throttle area. So now we need to dial in the other throttle ranges. The main goal here is to make sure we don't have any values in this column that are larger than this column, which you can see we have some of that going on here. This also comes down a lot to your preferences. So for me, I don't like 50% throttle to hit full boost because it's 50% throttle and I'd like that to be, about 50% of the power. So I try to tame these tunes down a little bit in the lower throttle percentage ranges. I'm gonna set this kind of low, not as low as it is right now. This area here, I'm going to set these equal to 18 PSI. And then I'm just going to kind of smooth these out. So right here, I'll set these equal to 16. And then these ones, I'll set equal to 14. And then these will set equal to 8. So, and then this one, I think I'll do 16. So we'll do 16. We'll make this 15. This will do 13. So I'm just doing a little smaller than these values here. And then this one will set equal to 10. This one's a little higher because it's in our spool up range. So if we can target a little higher earlier, like if we're rolling into the throttle at 3,600, we can get targeting 10 and get the turbo starting to move so we can hit our targets quicker. And then up here, we just need to make this smooth out. So we'll make this 10 psi, and I'll make this 10 psi, and we'll make this 8 psi. And then I'm just going to interpolate these horizontally. So I'm going to select those, and then I'll click interpolate horizontally, and that's just going to smooth those values out. Okay, and then we'll take a look at the graph here just to make sure everything looks nice and smooth, and this does look nice and smooth. So this all looks good for our target boost. So we'll copy this and I'll paste that into there. So now these two tables match each other. We're done with those tables. Now as far as our wastegate duty cycle tables, a good rule of thumb is you want your max wastegate duty cycle table is basically what we're going to tune, and then the initial wastegate duty cycle table you want to be like 20% lower than the max table. So I'm going to start, we're going to try out the across the board wastegate duty cycle method and see if it works. We'll select everything, I'll hit equals, and we're going to do 30%. That's what we're going to start out as the max. And then these ones, our initial, we'll do 10. So this is what we're going to start with. We'll do a poll, see how everything looks, and then we'll make the changes from there. But I think this is going to be a good start. We'll see if we can hit our boost targets in any of the RPM ranges, and we'll check out the tune and go from there. So let's take a look and see how this poll went. We will start down here. On this bottom graph right here, you'll see our primary wastegate duty cycle, turbodynamics. The wastegate duty cycle is in red, and we can see at like 3,000 RPMs. I don't think I was full throttle at this point because the RPM is still kind of flat. So I think this was like steady state coming down, maybe starting to get into the gas a little bit. We see the primary wastegate duty cycle jumps up to 10, and then immediately once we start increasing RPM, it peaks out at 30, which was the max that we had it set to, and it holds 30 up until right here where it drops to 29. So you can see that the wastegate duty cycle drops as the turbodynamics drops, because right now the turbodynamics is 9. We're maxing out, we're way too off of our target. And then as we start to approach our target and that turbodynamics drops to 0 when we hit our target, then it pulls the primary wastegate duty cycle. You can see it modulates right here and then ends up adding it back in, trying to maintain that boost pressure. And then the turbodynamics increases, and all the way to red line it maxes out again because we're not hitting our target. So what this tells me, to hit our target of 25 psi, we're going to need a little bit more than 30% wastegate duty cycle, because this we got up to 24, which is almost there, but it's not quite there. This also tells me that before 4,000 RPMs where we're hitting our target, we need more wastegate duty cycle, and after we need more wastegate duty cycle. So with this knowledge, let's go make some changes to our tune. So let's open up our max wastegate duty cycle table. So everything is set to 30 right now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to select all this, and I'm going to do equal to 40. And that should allow us to hit our target. And since we want to give the car the ability to spool up more, we want to give it more wastegate duty cycle at lower RPMs. So I'm going to select everything right here, and we are going to put 50. And then I'm going to select everything lower, and we're also going to do 50. We're going to see how this helps to maintain the boost pressures at the higher RPMs. And then now that we have the max wastegate duty cycle tuned, I'm going to open up my other 2 initial wastegate duty cycle tables. I'm going to select all this, copy, and paste that into one of these tables. And then we're going to select it again, click Edit, Multiply Data. And we want this to be 20% lower, so I'm going to multiply it by 0.80. and that'll make this 20% lower than the max. And then we'll copy this again and we'll paste it in the other one, so these two match now. So let's get this flashed on and then do another pull and see what happens. So let's take a look and see how we did on that pull. So if we look here at the graph, the red line here on the bottom graph. So as we start to get into the throttle, we can see that the Wastegate Duty Cycle jumps up to 50, maxes out, and then at, what is this, 3,600 RPMs, we see that the Wastegate Duty Cycle begins to drop. As we approach our targets, we're still kind of high in the boost error, but it starts to drop. Turbo's starting to spool. As we approach 4,000 RPMs, we hit our peak, 24.92. We actually overshoot a little bit. So we hit 26.78 PSI, which is higher than our target, which tells me that our primary Wastegate Duty Cycle is a little bit too high. So 24.92. Basically, that's our target, 25. We're at 38 primary Wastegate Duty Cycle, and that's on the down sweep to hit that at 4,000 RPMs. Just to keep that from overboosting, we're going to kind of dial it back a little bit. We can see that our car can hit our target at 38% Wastegate Duty Cycle. So just to rein this in a little bit, I'm just going to select these that are 40, and I'm going to set them to 38 just to kind of lower that ceiling a little bit. If we look at our table here, 3,800 is our next or our previous RPM that we're going to look at. So let's come down here and we'll look for 3,800. We still have a boost error. We're not hitting the target at this RPM. And our primary Wastegate Duty Cycle is dropping down to 44. We currently are at 50. I think that's a good spot for it to be at because we want to keep it high to keep it spooling, but we don't want it too high because if it's too high, that's what's going to cause overboosting. So I think 50 is good for 3,800 RPMs. 3,200 RPMs, we're not going to see much. But if we come back here and look at this, if we go to 3,200, we are at max Wastegate Duty Cycle. So we can add a little bit more to this. So I'll select everything from 32 and up, and we're going to make that 60. Just to start out there. Now let's look at the other side after we hit our target. So after 4,000 RPMs, we are kind of tickling around 24 and slowly lowering down. So it's staying pretty flat, but it's not really maintaining our targets as well as I would like. So 4,500, we come back down from overboosting and we're like at our target now. And we're sitting at 34 primary Wastegate Duty Cycle. For this section right here, we're going to lower that to 40. That's going to give us plenty of Wastegate Duty Cycle at 4,500 RPMs, keeping us from overboosting. Now let's take a look at 5,000. So I'm just going to go through these graphs and go to the specific timelines and just see where the Wastegate Duty Cycle is at, how close we are to our target, what the turbodynamics is doing. So if we look at 5,000 RPMs, turbodynamics is negative 0.07. Basically saying we are at our target. It's a little low, but nothing crazy. And our primary Wastegate Duty Cycle is still at 34, and it's starting to sweep back up. So for 5,000 RPMs, I think we can leave it at 50 because we're going to start needing to ramp in the Wastegate Duty Cycle again to maintain our target. And then let's check out 6,000. So we can see here the primary Wastegate is ramping up. So at around 6,000 RPMs, we're at 22.8 PSI, so we're dropping. Our turbodynamics is becoming more positive, and we're at 41 primary Wastegate Duty Cycle. And then after 6,000, we got 7,000. Primary Wastegate Duty Cycle is maxed out again, just to kind of match what's on this side. 50% is good at 5,000 for now. Anything past 6,000, we're going to make 60%. We're going to give this another try. Before we do that though, let me get the initials set up. So same as before, Control Copy, Control V, and then select all, edit multiply data 0.80, and then copy and paste. So let's get this flashed on the car and do another pull. So at the beginning of the pull, 3,000 RPMs, we see that we are at 60% wastegate duty cycle. And then at 3,200 RPMs, it starts to lower down to 50. So when I tuned this, when I was actually on the road, I had 3,600 was the set scaler, and then I changed it to 3,800 after this data log. But I already did that earlier. And let me show you what I mean by this. The wastegate duty cycle table, this 3,800 right here was 3,600, and it was set to 50. And now what that did is it made this automatically drop after 3,200 RPMs, because it was 3,200 RPM said 60, but after 3,200 RPMs, 3,600 RPMs said 50. So in this distance right here, it needs to go from 60 to 50, and this is affecting the spool up. So what I did was I changed 3,600 to 3,800 so that this slope would not happen. So that was one change that I made that we already did. So moving on past that, at around 4,000, 4,100, we're hitting our peak. We're overshooting slightly by like 1 psi, and we are at 30% wastegate duty cycle. So at 4,000 RPMs, we have it set to 38. This is at 34, and it's peaking and it's overshooting. So I'm actually going to lower it a bit more from where it was at. So I'm going to select 4,000, and we're going to make this equal to 35. So our next time point is 4,500 RPMs. So let's go to 4,500 and just see what's up. So 4,500 RPMs, it's on a down little swoop, but it's maintaining our boost target, and it's at 32, 33. And right here we're at 40, so I think that's fine where it's at. And then let's go to 5,000. So at 5,000, we're at 35% wastegate duty cycle. 23, we're a little low on our target, but we're not using all of our wastegate duty cycle. 6,000 RPMs, we are beginning to drop off on the boost. This section right here, even though it kind of fluctuates a little bit, it's pretty flat, and the primary wastegate duty cycle is kind of just slowly sloping up. The turbodynamics is pretty flat through here, but then after 6,000 RPMs, we start to see it climb again, and then the primary wastegate duty cycle maxes back out at 60 at 6,500 RPMs. So I think what I'm going to do is after 6,000, I'm going to set this all equal to 70. Since we changed this 3,800 to 50, this 3,200, we're not going to hit our targets there, so we can honestly make this as high as we want, but I'm going to set this to 70. We'll just see what happens with that. So we'll get this flashed onto the car, see what kind of changes this makes. Taking a look at this graph, you can see that this primary wastegate duty cycle slope is much steeper in the critical range here, so it stays higher longer. But I think we can massage this a little bit more to make it even better for spool up. I don't think we're going to hit peak much earlier than 4,000 RPM. That seems to be pretty consistent, but the area under the curve in this zone might be improved if we increase the primary wastegate duty cycle. So it's worth a try, and it's also good to have a positive turbodynamics in the spool up range to keep the car trying to spool it up as quick as possible. Let's go to our max wastegate duty cycle table. Currently 3,800 is set to 50. I'm gonna bump this up to 60 because this needs to drop to 35 by 4,000 RPMs, and that's when we're hitting our peak. So in theory, we could make 3,800 90% wastegate duty cycle, and it should still drop really fast to 35. but we'll do 60. I don't think we'll benefit much more from going any higher. I think 70 is good for 3200, and then all of these I'm going to set to 90 just because we're not hitting our targets there and we just want to get the turbo moving at these ranges, so we'll set all those to 90. Now if we come back to our graph, 4,000 RPMs, we are still hitting target, a little bit higher, no big deal though. It comes back down, it's holding, and then we still see the same drop off to 22 psi, kind of plateaus around 22.5. So that just might be the efficiency of the turbo. It's sometimes not possible to maintain your peak pressure all the way to red line because you kind of run out of volumetric efficiency of your turbo. We can see with the Wastegate Duty Cycle, it slowly goes up to 80 and then plateaus, and 80 is at 7,000 RPMs. I might just make this peak out a little earlier and just see what that does, because we can keep the primary Wastegate Duty Cycle high over here. We're not gonna have an overboosting issue. So I think what we're gonna do is 6,000 we have set to 70. At 6,000 we're 24 psi. That's pretty good. So we did gain a little bit when we're at 54% Wastegate Duty Cycle. So 6,000 we'll leave at 70, and then I'm just going to make the rest of this equal to 90. So this should be pretty close to where it needs to be for our final table. There's not much more we can do at this point. Before we flash this on, let me edit the initial tables. So now this method of tuning, where from 11% throttle to 95% throttle, it's the same Wastegate Duty Cycle throughout. It's a very easy way to start out, but as far as like drivability goes, it's not very good, because if we look at our target boost table here, we can see that these are also corresponding similarly to different throttle positions, but depending on your throttle position, there's different boost targets. So at 50% throttle, we're targeting a lot less boost pressure than at full throttle. With this much Wastegate Duty Cycle, what tends to happen is if you're going half throttle, you overshoot your target and then it brings it back down. So you have this like feeling where it's like the boost comes on and you feel it hits 25 psi at half throttle, and then it like shuts it back down real quick. I'm gonna do another poll to confirm this table as far as reaching our targets at full throttle. And then I'm going to do a poll trying to do 40%, 50% throttle and see how much Wastegate Duty Cycle is required to hit our targets at those throttle ranges. And then I'm going to adjust the Wastegate Duty Cycle here to keep them from doing that weird spike thing. So let's do some polls. I'll show you the spiking that I'm talking about. So if we take a look at our wide open throttle pull, so this is throttle opening angle. It just shows you when I go full throttle or what percentage throttle we are. So we see at the beginning here, we're not using all the Wastegate Duty Cycle, but it's starting at like almost 90, and then it's coming down. And then right here, you see this steep drop off at 3,800 RPMs. That's where we went from having 60 BR max dropping down to 35 at 4,000 RPMs. We do overboost a little bit more than we did before, so I might lower that just to tame back that overboost a bit. It's hard to tell if we actually got any area under the curve here. And then we maintain our boost pressure pretty consistently all the way through, and then still plateaus at 22 at 90% Wastegate Duty Cycle. This is about as much as we can do for the max, except maybe fixing this area up front here. So for our max table here, 3,800 RPMs, I'm just gonna drop this down to 55 to get it going a little slower. And then at 4,500 here, we don't really need it to be 40 because it's kind of just sitting at 30 still. So this could be 35 as well. And then that'll ramp up to 50. So let's just double check what 5,000 is at. 5,000, we're at 32% wastegate duty cycle. So I can even lower that. So let's set that to 40. And that's where we start to drop, is after 6,000. So I think where we have this at is fine. So this is good for the maxes. So now let's open up our partial throttle tunes, or logs, I mean. This section right here goes to 5,000 RPMs at about 40% throttle. It fluctuates a little bit, but it stays pretty consistent there. So you see this red line here, how it's using a bunch of wastegate duty cycles, 66%, and it gets the boost coming up real fast. And we hit a peak of 19, and our target boost at this throttle position is 11. So we are significantly overshooting our boost target, and then it quickly drops back down. So you can see that in the pull where it goes woo woo, and it drops back down, and then it has no problem maintaining even higher than what the target boost is. What's our wastegate duty cycle here? It's zero wastegate duty cycle. So we need wastegate duty cycle before 4,000 RPMs to get it to that area. But as we seen earlier, this turbo makes 18 PSI on 0% wastegate duty cycle, and our targets at 40% are lower than 18%. So we can only do so much to limit how fast that this turbo spools up. So this one's really bad. Look at this one. 3,600 RPMs, 46% throttle, and we hit 22 PSI when our target is 12 PSI. And then it drops back down. So yeah, I'm seeing a trend here. So if you're rolling into the gas, you're in these lower throttle ranges at these lower RPMs. We want to keep some of these high, but we should be full throttle by 3,800, 4,000 RPMs. So these ones are kind of where we're going to start cutting it back. 3,800, I'm going to make this 30 because that's kind of where it was sitting at to maintain its pressure. So that's more than enough. 3,200, just to make this a little bit of a smoother transition, we'll set that to 35. All of these I'll do 20, and then we will just interpolate horizontally like so. Actually, I'm going to do 35%. I'm going to make these equal to 30 as well. And then these ones will be 35. And then from here to here, we're going to interpolate horizontally. Yes, like this. Okay, so this is going to tame it down a little bit, hopefully, and it's not going to be so jumpy. So here we're going to do just a smooth, gradual decline. So keeping these numbers high right here is still beneficial to the spool. So we'll do 50 and 60, and then I'm going to keep this first row here 90. And then same thing we did down low here. We're going to make these ones equal to 60, and we'll make these ones equal to 50, and then this will set to 20 as well. Oops, we're going to set this to 20, interpolate horizontally, and this is just kind of arbitrary, honestly. There's no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing right now. I'm essentially just wanting to keep this range right here higher and kind of steady increase so that this helps with the spool up. If we're half throttle at 2,800 because we're rolling into the throttle, this helps with the spool up. So we want to keep these numbers high, but once we're in a range where we are hitting our targets, 3,800 and up, I really want these values right in this area to be lower. And this is our max, so our initial is going to be set even lower than this. We're just telling the car that this is the max we want to go. And then obviously the wide open throttle category, we have the correctly tuned wastegate duty cycles to reach our targets. Let's copy this, paste it into our initial, And then we'll do edit, multiply data, 0.80, and then copy and paste. And there we go. So let's get this flashed on the car, do another poll, see if this helps at all. And then we'll just make sure that we're still hitting our targets in a reasonable amount of time with the changes we made, hopefully not overboosting. So after those changes we made, we can see that the primary wastegate duty cycle in the spool up range has tamed up a little bit because that partial throttle area was lowered. So slowed down the spool there a little bit, but we still reach our target at 4,000 RPMs. And we don't overboost as bad as before. So 26, 1 PSI high, that's good enough. And then our wastegate duty cycle is down to 27. We oscillate a little bit, maintain our boost pressure, 24, 24, 23, and taper out to 22. And then our wastegate duty cycle steadily climbs up to red line. So this looks good. I would say that our wide open throttle boost tuning is done. So let's look at the partial throttles and see if our changes made any noticeable differences. So let's take a look here. This is 41% throttle. We still have this little peak here, and then it kind of comes back down. So it's not exactly the best. And then as soon as we kind of start hitting our targets, it drops down to 0 and kind of stays down there. I don't know if there's much we can do to keep the turbo from hitting 18 psi unless we just change our boost targets to 18 psi, so that they don't pull back. They just kind of get up there and stay up there, which honestly is not a bad idea. Kind of we're just seeing the same trend of it kind of doing this thing, peak and then fall back down. So you can see my target boosts are pretty low at 50% throttle. So when I made this initial target boost graph and I had to recreate this video, I didn't have anything to reference it off of other than the final tune. Yeah, so these values I had here were much lower than they are now in these throttle ranges. So I just raised these so that we don't have that little drop. That's one way to do it, is just make the target boost tables match what the minimum the turbo will do. But this is about as good as it's gonna get as far as our boost tuning goes. Yeah, so I think before I had these set to like 15 or something, and then these were probably like 12. So bumping those up to 18, that's what the turbo wants to make without any help. So this just kind of smooths out that peak. And then the wastegate duty cycle is fine where it's at. It doesn't need to use this 30. It can go lower if it wants to. And this does help with the spool up, which is important. So we're not going to get the best drivability out of a car that's this heavily modified. So I don't think this is anything to worry too much about. It's worth sacrificing a little bit of drivability to have good spool up. And I also in my car have a switch wired into my boost controller so I can turn it off, and then it just runs off of 0% wastegate duty cycle, and it's much smoother. So if I don't want to deal with the boost coming on hard all the time, I can just turn the wastegate boost controller off and it'll just drive nice and smooth. So that is going to be it for this boost tuning video. I hope it made sense. I apologize about the filming mishap. I won't know till I edit this video, but I hope that it's concise and everything makes sense that I'm saying. it's not as good as, you know, being able to do the changes real time and see all that. So I did my best to get this to make sense. So if you have any questions for me, just leave them down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer those. The boost tuning is pretty straightforward. Let me just kind of summarize the process real quick. The hardest part about tuning boost is getting the target boost table set up, believe it or not. Getting the target boost table set up for a new turbo so that the boost comes on smoothly and hits your targets and is reasonable. It really guides the whole rest of the process. So if you have a bad target boost table, it's going to be a bad tune. So really take the time to get that target boost table good and dialed in. And doing pulls with no wastegate duty cycle really helps you to figure out what kind of shape that graph is going to be. It's not as simple as just increasing the maxes for your turbo. You're going to have to shift the spool up range down if you have a bigger turbo. So once you have that done, you're just raising the wastegate duty cycle max a little bit at a time until you hit your target, and then you figure out where your peak boost is and what target, how much wastegate duty cycle required to get there. And then from that point of where you are hitting your target, you just increase the wastegate duty cycle around that point before and after to maintain your boost pressure after you hit your peak and to improve spool up before you hit your peak without overboosting. So you find your earliest point of hitting your boost target, and then you work out from there and just slowly increase. As far as the rest of the table goes, you can do the all the way across the board, same values from 0% throttle to 100% throttle. If you want to smooth things out a little bit, do what I did. It'll retain your spool up abilities, but make the car a little less twitchy when you're at half throttle. It won't go to 25 PSI and then pull back real hard. But yeah, as you see, the first 2 cycles of me doing my initial pull, setting up the target boost table, and the initial wastegate duty cycle, after that, it's pretty smooth sailing of just doing pulls and then just changing wastegate duty cycle, pull, wastegate duty cycle. The next thing we're going to have to tune is the timing. But before we do the timing, I want to recheck my fueling because we're probably hitting MAF scaling ranges that we weren't able to tune before with the higher boost pressures. So we might need to add a little bit more fuel into some areas. And it's good to keep your eye on and make sure your engine's not knocking during these pulls. My car's on ethanol, so it can run pretty lean and not knock. And I think it is running a little bit lean, so we'll have to address that. But I'm going to address the fueling, and then right after that, probably the same video, we're going to be doing the timing. So stay tuned for that. Go check out the Easy Flash test connector button on my store, swspeedco.com. If you like the videos I make and want to support the channel, you can go buy t-shirts from swspeedco.com or any of the parts that we sell. If you're interested in more tuning videos, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you get notified when new videos are released. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. If you have any questions for me, leave them down in the comments below. If you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing. If you know of somebody who might like this video, please share it with them. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.